Good afternoon. Please allow me to recognize High Commissioner of South Africa to Canada, His Excellency Riaz Sheikh. As has been mentioned just now, South Africa and Canada have a long history and a rich tapestry of bilateral relations. In recognition of that, the two countries in 2003 signed a joint declaration of intent on strengthening cooperation. The two countries meet annually to discuss a range of areas of mutual interest that include economic, scientific, social, and cultural. We also discuss foreign policy issues and regional cooperation. It is therefore not surprising that this year, International Economic Forum of the Americas invited us to partner in this prestigious economic gathering. For that, we are grateful. Ladies and gentlemen, South Africa is a unique social experiment. The country moved from apartheid to democracy. As a country, we have learned that building democracy is challenging. We have also recognized that service delivery to our citizens requires continuous building, learning, innovation, and rebuilding cycle. Just to give you the scale of our challenges, South Africa apartheid government services pre-1994 catered for just above 7 million people. Today, in 2023, after democracy, South Africa has to deliver services to 60 million people. In other words, 8.5 times more than it was prior 1994. This in itself is a massive experience. In our attempt to implement transformative agendas, things sometimes go wrong, like infrastructure deficit, slow economic growth, joblessness, inequality, poverty, and many others. That's our unique situation as we speak, with a mixture of high innovation, as we have seen, and sluggishness. We also have the developed world excellence and developing world dysfunctionality. This, therefore, presents these unique opportunities that not only exist for South Africa, but also for the continent as a whole. We therefore invite you to be part of this unique experience as we build the South Africa we want, which is non-racial, non-sexist, united in our diversity, and a prosperous nation. It is in this context that during the 17th edition of the Toronto Global Forum, we brought to you two very important entities of our country who are central in the upgrading and renewal of our critical infrastructure, to share with you the opportunities available and how you can partner with us. Thank you. And I hand over to you, Gareth.
Consul General Thandiwe Fadane, thank you so much. High Commissioner Moshe, to Team South Africa and everyone supporting the delegation, and of course to each one of you with us today, a very good afternoon. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome the illustrious panel we have with us today. I'm from South Africa originally, though my wife is Toronto born, but I have the distinct pleasure of spending a lot of my time back in the country. And so in the context of discussing decarbonization today, we know that financing is a key aspect of getting to that reality. And so it's my honor to moderate this panel and offer each one of our distinguished speakers an opportunity to present who they are, what they're doing, and of course, why they've taken the time to be with us today and throughout the week here in Toronto. To my immediate left, Lefense Nakoneng, General Manager of Research at Brand South Africa. The floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you, Gareth. And afternoon to everybody. At Brand South Africa, we are the official marketing agency for the government of South Africa to promote our nation as a favorable trade and investment destination to the global community. So for us to be here, it's really an honor, especially, over the last 2 days, learning and getting insights in terms of how Canada is transitioning, or at least has, gained traction in terms of its transition around decarbonization. As a country that is currently also transitioning, I think there's a lot of opportunities between South Africa and Canada in terms of meeting or working collectively to meet our targets in terms of decarbonization over the next couple of years. Thank you, and I look forward to this discussion.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Lefense. And to your left, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome the Chief Financial Officer of the Development Bank of Southern Africa, Zodwa Mbele. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Gareth, and thank you everyone for taking your time to come and listen to the story of South Africa. As it has been mentioned, I'm the Chief Financial Officer of the Development Bank of Southern Africa. The bank is 100% owned by South African government. However, it operates in South Africa as well as the sub-Saharan region. So we cover various countries in terms of providing infrastructure solution. So the mandate of the bank is largely for development to stimulate economy, but also to ensure that the infrastructure that we finance also improves the quality of life of the people. Really, the vision for the bank and really for African Union is to see Africa that is free of poverty and the Africa that is also self-dependent and not dependent on external, donors, to be just specific. So it's also important to highlight that much as we are owned by South Africa, South African government, we do not necessarily get to be, directed to lend in a particular way. So the mandate covers really the ultimate purpose of the government of South Africa, but from the day-to-day governance of the organization, we have the board of directors that governs the bank. We do not necessarily get the money from government on daily basis. We are self-funded. So as such, we have a very robust governance structure that is independent of government. And I thought I must also mention that part. In terms of our model, typical of any financial institution, we are a leverage institution. In other words, we raise capital from the capital market, including international capital market. Just recently, we've heard the themed bonds on the sustainability. We raised bonds in the US supported by the PIMCO. We've raised bonds that are supported by the African Development Agency in France. We also have some of the bonds that are listed in the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, very old bonds. So as a bank, we are quite familiar with, raising offshore capital. We understand what the investors are looking for, especially where it's foreign investment. Also importantly to understand is that South Africa has got a very deep capital market. So as a bank, we also have some of the bonds that are listed in the Stock Exchange of Johannesburg, where we tap into for liquidity position and to fund our projects. So it's important to appreciate that much as we are a bank that is owned by government, but we collaborate heavily with the private sector through funding and also the projects that we finance as an organization. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Zodwa. As president of the Canada-Africa Chamber of Business, our third panelist is an individual I've had the distinct pleasure of interviewing before. Catherine Kaufman, welcome back. The group executive responsible for project preparation at the Development Bank of Southern Africa. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. I think it's important to point out that, as our CFO has said, that we raise capital in the debt capital markets to fund our development activities. In doing so, we've heard before that there are a platitude of capital out there to fund projects, but not enough investable projects to fund. And that's really where our division come in project preparation, especially the DBSA, the Development Bank of Southern Africa. We follow quite an integrated approach to infrastructure delivery. In other words, we invest in infrastructure from planning, ideation of projects, preparation, finance, actual capital lending into projects. And then also instances where we have state-owned entities that don't have technical capacity. There's an area within the bank that actually provides oversight in the construction and maintenance of projects. If Gareth can just indulge me a little, to understand the task of project preparation, it does involve quite a bit of heavy lifting. And so within the division, we have several business units which talks to the integrated approach of the bank. First and foremost, the planning area takes care of municipalities to help them conceptualize infrastructure plans and then help them to develop it to get a budget allocation from the fiscus, from National Treasury. We then have an area which is like a project finance area, which to help municipalities and private developers to develop their projects towards bankability itself. As you know, the pre-feasibility requires a bit of capital, but the really high-risk capital is that stage just before you make a project investable. And that's really what that area does. We also have an area that's quite important from a climate finance perspective. The DBSA in 2013 decided we are going to inculcate into our investments principles of climate finance and into nature-based solutions and adaptation finance. And so we have an area that actually, whenever we appraise project preparation, we make sure that it's aligned with climate finance principles wherever possible. We also have an area called programs, and they ideate new programs for the country. Programs are country platforms, national platforms. The JET IP is a country platform, although it wasn't created by us. A very significant program that you must be aware of is the Renewable Energy Program. It is a birth child of the South African government's policy directive for an energy mix, where we would decarbonize our economy and transition towards net zero. The program allows for private parties like investors like yourself in the technical space, in the private equity space, as well as development finance institutions who choose to fund into those projects alongside ourselves and other commercial banks. And we've run that program for 14 years. We, as a consequence, have about 6.5 gigawatts of power on the grid. 6 gigawatts is operational and 515 megawatts is battery storage in development. What we are not mentioning there is the fact that it created to the development of skills and jobs, as well as, of course, revenue and much cheaper tariffs for customers. Another area within our space is that of innovation. It's called product innovation. It's like an angel investor who invest in startups of green technology. Quite a busy area at the moment. And last but not least, we also obviously try to bring into our space an area which is quite popular, which is the project development and execution area, which helps us with new programs offices that we incubate, such as the independent power producers. Now, the importance of this phase is that we step into areas as project preparation that are difficult, that are imperfect. And as a DFI, we are market makers, and we try to create an environment where you can invest.
Brilliant. Catherine, thank you so much. And there's a lot happening, and I know we'll have opportunities, but I really had to give you the floor because your leadership has been exceptional. And thank you for just giving what is really a taste of so much else going on behind the scenes. Finally, for some opening remarks as well to enrich the context for the discussion, as each one of you have. Ajith JJ, such a pleasure to host you. You're head of asset management and treasury, of course, at the Infrastructure Bank. I invite you to set the scene.
Thanks, Gareth, and good afternoon to the audience. Just to create a bit of context around the Infrastructure Fund, it's a fairly new platform within South Africa. It was actually conceptualized and executed upon in January of 2021. Its mandate is largely to ensure that we create a platform for sustainable infrastructure investment, as well as picking up on prevalent themes around ESG, decarbonization, the green economy, and creating platforms for all forms of capital, not excluding any. So all forms of capital to be mobilized within a single vehicle. The fund has been anchored by the national government, and it's got a funding commitment of $5 billion US. What we've seen in the last, since inception rather, is that we've mobilized $1 billion of pipeline, active pipeline at various stages of execution. We've worked closely with Catherine's area in making sure that these projects were investable by a whole series of investors. The intention from a government perspective is that we actually leverage that $5 billion by at least 10 times over a 10-year period. So the investment opportunity is massive. The platform has been created. We ensure that the principles of ESG are well embedded in what we do. Interestingly enough, the South African landscape from an infrastructure perspective lends itself very easily to the E, the S, and the G. Just transition is also very critical for us in what we do. And thematically, the areas of focus for us as a country includes energy, water, logistics as core areas that we are looking to invest and finance. Why have we had success with the infrastructure fund since inception to date? It's largely around the perfect storm for pension funds in particular to fund infrastructure assets on the back of blended finance instruments. So the infrastructure fund creates blended finance instruments, de-risk projects, allows for pension funds to co-invest, and the long tenor of our investment instruments actually lend themselves to the liabilities that pension funds have to actually underpin over their life. Gareth, I'll pause there, and I'm sure we'll get into the meeting.
To upgrade and renew critical infrastructure, what are the sort of financing models that are going to enable it? And I'd love to get your respective views on not only that landscape, but the legislative context in which it takes place. So I'll go in the order within which you each introduce yourselves. The Fence, in terms of the macro overview, we've heard a lot about what is going on in South Africa, particularly from here in North America. Could you give us an overview of the investment climate as you see it from Brand SA?
Thanks, Gareth. South Africa, currently, in terms of a country, it still remains the most preferred destination for multilateral institutional investors in South Africa. In fact, about half of all multinational investors still remain situated in South Africa. Right now, we're talking about, infrastructure investments. For these projects that are coming online, we are not starting off on a low base. South Africa's infrastructure base is quite advanced. We've got over 144 airports. Our international airports are ranked first, second, and third on the continent. We've got 8 ocean economy ports, 2 bulk container ports, and 2 dry bulk ports also. And Mossel Bay, which is based in those who've been in the Western Cape, also allows for the importation of LNG. So this is not to say that, look, all is perfect from an infrastructure perspective. Our government has continued to invest in infrastructure and has continued to expand infrastructure. So entering into public-private partnerships to expand our ports. And at the very same time, also currently, the plans are afoot in terms of unbundling our utility, state utility, power utility, to make our energy sector more competitive. I'll leave it to my colleagues, obviously, to go more into detail around some of these projects.
Fantastic. Just building on that, if I could jump to you quickly, Catherine. South Africa is obviously embarking on the renewal and upgrading of infrastructure. Can you talk us through, just in summary, some of the financing models that you're envisaging are going to really deliver on this infrastructure landscape?
Yes, so typically the financing models that you tend to see, especially in our part of the world, are off balance sheet structures following COVID. And even before that, when the economy was in a downturn, our sovereigns were a little bit stressed from a fiscus perspective. And also from a technical capacity perspective, we wanted to augment best practice skills. And so we tend to focus on public-private partnerships. So a lot of the funding models will have that in place and different versions of public-private partnerships. There will be blended finance models. In other words, they will have maybe a grant element, but the grant element is not for our folks to be concerned about. That comes from other international DFIs, green climate finance donors, etc. So we mix that, we blend that into a structure that also has senior debt, mezzanine funding, subordinated debt, quasi-lending, and quasi-equity structures. And the rationale behind that is to make sure as far as possible that we've done sufficient project preparation work that's robust, that demonstrate that there is a market that will offtake, and to, as far as possible, hopefully diminish the requirement for guarantees, but still ensuring that the market gets the same returns as if they had a guarantee and the same certainty and security of funding.
Got it.
One, if I could mention, in terms of the decarbonization, is we've also established certain funding platforms. I think Ajit will speak more to what the IEF does, but we've got a national green hydrogen platform. And that is, we're doing that with the JV with the Invest International, that's the Dutch government, and South African government. But it also includes private sector parties, but the bank is an LP on the structure, blended finance model with a tranche of project preparation, development finance, as well as a construction loan. And those are very, very big tickets. So it's one of those areas where we can also have investors come in and join alongside us.
Excellent. And Zodwa, I want to come to you in a moment, but something struck me, Ajit. If you look at the regulatory environment, of course, every market exists in a policy context. As head of asset management and treasury at the Infrastructure Fund, what kind of legislative updates do you think are important for the audience to be aware of that have been implemented in the country as part of this drive to attract investment?
So Gareth, and I think it's important that we approach that within the context of decarbonization. Mm-hmm. So South Africa, have signed all the necessary treaties around climate change. We were participants at COP26, where we signed up to the UN framework on the Convention for Climate Change. And that has actually anchored a lot of what we approach and how we approach investments in infrastructure. We touched on the Catherine touched on the IPP a minute ago, and I think the IPPs have been in existence for, I'll round it and say 15 years within South Africa. And they have served a very, very critical role in our energy crisis that we do have in the country. But what it also has actually demonstrated is the data points which talks to the track record of the IPPs, the independent power producers within the country. And just by way of background, Gareth, what the IPPs did for South Africa is that it managed to mobilize capital from both domestic, in other words, local funders, as well as equity funding from abroad. So you had a lot of the European and Chinese, power producers, both from wind and solar, invest in the country. And in engaging with these data points, what one understands is that there are certain fundamental basics which South Africa's got right, which has made the South Africa destination attractive to investors. I think we've got a constitution which grounds the country. It grounds everything we do, and that constitution has been tested over the last 25, 30 years, and we've now got certainty as to what our constitutional core values are. In addition to that, we've also got a very modern and robust Companies Act, which talks to governance, embraces the best global practice of corporate governance, which helps to give certainty to investors as well. From an investment perspective, the the asset managers, the investment community actually take a lot of comfort that the investor protection mechanisms which are embedded in legislation have been tested, have been tried, and have been proven to be robust enough to protect investors. So those are some of the levers which actually give comfort to the investment community. Over and above that, we've also got a very liquid, a very developed stock exchange, which actually is now seeing many of those initial IPPs, the independent power producer assets, being brought to market, having de-risked, which actually shows a very good exit mechanism for investors over time as well. Our judiciary has proven itself time and time again to be credible, independent, robust, not subjected to any form of adverse influences. That gives one comfort as well. So those are some of the comments which were actually highlighted by some of the data points we looked to. Also, our tax regime is very, very certain. It's boring, it's steady, it's as steady as it comes. We all have certainty as to what our tax laws are, where the touch points are for investors. That has also assisted in giving the comfort that investors require, Gareth.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ajit. And Zodwa, I wanted to come to you, as a CFO, there's no small task, but as you listen to all these conversations, what are some of the insights or important things that you think need to be observed or said that are critical for understanding how we reach these financing targets for decarbonization?
Yeah, thanks, Gareth. I just want to lash on what has just been presented by Ajit. In terms of the country has never defaulted, despite being in the emerging markets. It has never defaulted. Our own bank has never defaulted on any obligation. I think it's very important to understand that. And it takes me to also just the environment, the economic environment that the bank operates within. In South Africa, we know that the economies were decimated by the COVID, and South Africa has decided to use infrastructure to get out of the COVID situation. However, the growth is not at the level that we would like to see because of some constraint on the logistics, the logistics part of the business as well as the energy. And we know that the government is working on those reforms to ensure that the economy is really getting the traction that it requires and we get out of the sluggish economic growth that we find ourselves in. We also know that at this point, there's still pressure points from the debt sustainability point of view. The ratio of the debt of the country versus the GDP, once again, influenced by just the slow economic growth, which is the work in progress at this point in time. However, there are also some shoots that we are seeing on the horizon. If you look at just recently, the interest rate environment has been going on up because of the inflation going up. But in the recent past, the last Reserve Bank decision in July, it decided to keep the interest rate environment stable because the inflation had clawed back within the target range, so it had cooled off a little bit. So it's very important to understand also the macroeconomic situation of South Africa within the context. Having said that, really the purpose for us as a bank of why we are here today, we are here to sell the development bank, to explore different capital markets so that we can see whether we can do business through the DBSA, whether they would like to co-fund with us alongside on the projects, or they would like to extend some financing mechanism to the DBSA with an aim of tapping into the markets that possibly the investors would not ordinarily reach on their own, because DBSA is very well positioned, to give that perspective on the global south in terms of reaching other markets. So really, we are exploring, and I'm not saying but I need to brag, we really have options. When we say we have deep capital market, it allows us to explore different markets. As I said earlier on, we've been in different markets in raising funding, and we have never defaulted, and this is why we continue to explore further afield. Hence, we're here today. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Zodwa. Catherine, did you want to weigh in on any of those points?
Sorry?
Did you want to weigh in? No, sorry, I may have misinterpreted. Thank you so much, Zodwa, I wanted to come back to some of your points, Ajit. You were discussing, of course, very much the domestic context, but if you look at supply chains and decarbonization in that context, maybe you'd share, this is much bigger than South Africa. Could you speak to some of the broader regional imperatives and how South Africa fits in as you see it?
Sure. So I think it's important to also understand that the infrastructure fund is limited to the infrastructure investments within South Africa. So we are very much a domestic investment vehicle. But having said that, we do have a very good sense for data points coming out of the rest of the African continent. Infrastructure actually is something that transcends the continent, and the need is really, really it's a real need, but it's also a great opportunity. Just by way of example, we're currently involved in our ports of entry, which is the revitalization of all of the borders, the ports of entry to in and around South Africa. There's about 6 of them with our neighboring countries. And one of the reasons for driving the revitalization of our ports of entry is actually to stimulate trade within the continent. And the knock-on effects of that will be substantial from a growth and a development of our neighbors and our neighbors' neighbors. So having said that, we've also picked up, once again, the trends as to what infrastructure for South Africa means. So if I take a step back from a decarbonization point of view, Gareth, South Africa has secured about $8.5 billion from a host of European, US, and I think Canadian government participants to drive decarbonization and a move towards just transition. So what that also means for us is that we have got capital to deploy for certain specific types of investments and projects. But what it does do, it allows for us, that amount of capital allows for us to move at scale. So we're not looking at projects on a project by project basis. We're looking at it on a programmatic approach. The ports of entry is exactly that. It's a program that we've put in place. And the reason why we look at the programmatic approach through Catherine's area is largely to ensure we achieve economies of scale. So you have standardization, you have, you're talking to one supplier to provide projects, goods, services across 6 projects. It drives down cost, and overall it improves the overall investment opportunity of the program. The reason why we want to roll out our programs at scale and on a programmatic basis is supply chain issues. The lead time to some of the material required for infrastructure at a practical level is long. So I was very encouraged to hear earlier on this week by some of the other commissions that we attended that Canada is the forefront of some of the innovation around certain technologies. That helps us with our endeavors to drive infrastructure delivery. What was also encouraging, Gareth, was the conversation with ECD, around how they can facilitate and assist international counterparts from an infrastructure sourcing perspective as well. Gareth,
Fantastic.
I hope I've touched on your points.
Ajit, absolutely brilliant. And I think, the rest of the conversation now, this lends itself into how we discuss the partnership and the role of Canadian investors within the sort of frameworks and the conditions that have just been described. Before we go into that and sort of how we reignite the Canada-South Africa corridor and deepen it, I just wanted to come back to you, Zodwa, because you made the point that South Africa's never defaulted, which is something taken for granted, but sometimes surprises people who are new to exploring the market or maybe are used to the emerging markets context. You were very frank about some of the issues in South Africa and how they're being addressed. But of course, South Africa exists in a global context with global pressures. And, South Africa, from a policy perspective, can only respond to that. How, for you as a chief financial officer, do you see some of those global risks and how have they been dealt with in the past, just by way of example?
Yeah. No, I mean, if you go back to what you said earlier on with the very robust financial system, this is why we're so cushioned during the 2008 global crisis. South Africa never experienced any pressure points in respect of that. So whilst we are part of the global community, but also, we have a very controlled exchange environment from the Reserve Bank point of view. So it's very important to also indicate, so it's not free fall. Similarly, I mean, our Reserve Bank has got very stringent the Basel regulatory framework. Most banks, of course, depend on the application of it. It's a global regulatory framework for the commercial banks. So it's how you apply it, very strict, very regulated financial system without stifling, the investments in South Africa itself. So it's just very important to see ourselves, yes, as part of the global community, but also what is also unique with respect to the application of those global standards, because you may have best practice, but it's how you go about it. So it's very cognizant of the fact that it's part of the global community. So it cannot afford, to default. But once again, we have a little bit of a diversified economy. If you think about it, exports, so fine, we might have trade deficit as we speak right now, we may be a net importer depending on the day, because we might have, never optimized the commodity boom cycle that we have just seen because of the logistics constraint that we are experiencing. But through the private sector partnership or participation at the logistics company, which is Transnet, we can unlock, the logistics so that we open up the corridor for export. Once again, we stimulate our economy and we improve, because you must remember around 1994, the growth of South Africa, the economic growth was in the region of the 5, the 7. So we can easily go back there if we just unblock the bottlenecks, which is energy at this point in time, and the logistics.
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly was remarkable, for that time as you described. So the call to action, the next steps, we've got the remaining portion of the program for about 12 minutes. And what I wanted to do is find out from each one of you sort of how you envisage the partnerships going forward. And I want to go to the final point on the program in front of us. And the question is this, Lefense, I'll begin with you as you talk to investors all over the world. How will Canadian investors benefit from some of the opportunities? And how do you see the South African and Canadian economic corridor deepening in a way that's benefiting both Canada's objectives and South Africa?
Absolutely. Gareth, we've set a target of reducing our carbon emissions by a range of around about 350 to 450 metric tons by 2030. That requires immense investment. So that on its own offers our partners in Canada an opportunity to come in to support our transition into a greener economy. At the very same time, as we are transitioning into this green economy, we need to now start developing new supply value chains for the critical minerals that are required for these new sectors that are coming up. We've pivoted around electricity. We've identified electric vehicles. At the very same time, obviously, green hydrogen, which was also mentioned. And I think that provides an opportunity also to institutional investors to come in, given the experience that Canada has, with the projects that have already been implemented and also have been proven locally. And some of the skill sets can also be exported to South Africa. So as a country, we are burgeoning forward. We are breaking ground, as my colleagues have mentioned. But more than anything, we are inviting Canadian businesses, institutional investors to come and partner with us as we transition into a greener future.
Thank you very much, Lefense. Zodwa, from your perspective, how do you see next steps for Canadian investors to benefit from the drive to decarbonization in South Africa?
So as I said earlier on, for the pension fund managers, you are invited, if you want to have different and diversified, asset portfolio, infrastructure in particular, in the global south, look no further than at the DBSA as your conduit, if you like, or as a gateway to other markets, but as a conduit, or alongside us, fund on projects. We have huge experience. We're a very respectable and a reputable DFI in the sub-Saharan region. So if you're looking for the long-term yield pickup, you are the partner to us because we take a long-term perspective for infrastructure financing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Catherine, your take.
Yes, so for me, it's really, I think the focus has always been looking at the decarbonization journey as a vehicle for development,
Right.
as the vehicle for development. And so in South Africa, you're not starting from scratch. We believe in partnerships. We partner in terms of funds that we manage on behalf of international DFIs, both for funding and project preparation. Tier 2 capital through our treasury that we receive through our treasury to invest in renewable energy and other nature-based solution projects. So for me, the journey of a just transition is one where we can truly partner. And a just transition is not only about what happened to jobs when, how are we going to transition from closing down coal power stations to renewables, but also to take the view that it is also just for us to transition towards a greener economy, because we've seen the impact of climate change on the economy, on GDP, and the impacts of calamities, climate calamities, when factories are destroyed through floods, hurricanes, etc. Insurance companies, it's becoming more and more difficult and uninsurable to get these workers back to work. So from a just perspective, we'll be losing jobs if we don't collectively go towards a greener economy, towards net zero. But most importantly, we are a carbon intensive country still, as much as we've made a lot of progress on renewable energy. And that's where we need partnership from you. We do not believe in a blunt instrument in going towards net zero, because that will be economic suicide for us as well as the continent. It's a gradual ramp up of renewable energy and a gradual rundown of carbon intensive industries. So please join us as technical and financial partners in the different infrastructure programs that we've initiated.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Catherine. We've got a few minutes left. I know there's some excited conversation that's already begun in the room. I just want to come to you again, Ajit, as you speak to your colleagues here who are like your counterparts in asset management and treasury, making some big decisions. What's your message in terms of the way forward when you sit down and you have follow-up meetings after this panel? Where are we going?
So I think as a point of departure, Gareth, I hope I've communicated the message that there is a healthy respect for capital within South Africa. We've always delivered on our capital promises, and we will continue to do so. I also think that there is the financing element, that we are looking for capital. The investment opportunities speak for themselves, and we've developed and demonstrated confidence to the broader market as to what is possible. Broader being the broader international market, but there's also room for technical expertise, transfer arrangements, etc. What struck me over the last 3 days at this forum is that there is a depth of technical skill, opportunity, and innovation within the Canadian market, which definitely can resonate within the South African market. And I would encourage that be pursued further as well, in addition to the call for capital. I think from a South African perspective, we talk of economic resilience. I think South Africa transcends economic resilience. It is resilient, full stop. And that also creates the platform for investment, for growth, and for development. I'll go back to my opening comments around ESG. ESG is critical for investors, for investees, and let's not forget for the pension community as well. So South Africa offers you the ability to solve for the E, the S, and the G, in one market, and it's measurable. The social is often overlooked. We deliver on the social as well. So my takeaway from this forum is that we've both communicated what is possible from a Canadian perspective and what is possible from within the South African context. And I do think that takeaway should be given effect to, where we begin to work together and collaborate.
1 point.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sodwa. Yes, feel free.
So I think also the point that we want to make, maybe which may not be, something that is well known, the relationship between the two countries. Our High Commissioner indicated this morning that actually South Africa is a net investor, because most of the mines that are operating in South Africa, they are not listed. Some of them have a dual listing in South Africa, but most of them, they are listed in Toronto Exchange, actually, and the AIM, in Australia. So it's very important that the flows, we need to redirect them back home where the operations and the resources are. So very important point as a parting shot. So please bring more pension money from this market down south so that you can do more mining, that you can also enrich your stock exchange.
We've got just 2 minutes remaining, and I think everything that needs to be said, to set the scene has been said. As you may be moved by the spirit of inspiration, are there any final comments or parting points that either of you wish to make as we wrap up what I truly think has been a wonderful session? Thank you so much to each one of you for making it happen. Lefense.
All I can say is that the relationship has been there for a very long time. Nelson Mandela, when he came out of prison, I think Canada was one of the first places that he visited, and in fact, he became an honorary citizen of this country. So in the spirit of that, we should continue to work together and to deepen our relationship. Thanks.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
On that point, we are concluded. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much to our esteemed panel.